Okay, so we'll begin with the hydrogen oxygen fuel cells. I'll be taking questions at the very end of this class. So, uh, okay, so let's start with the general structure of hydrogen oxygen fuel cells. So the fuel cell consists of two compartments. So right here, I'll just open up the laser pen. So this is a pointer, yeah. So we have two compartments in a hydrogen oxygen fuel cell, right? So we have the, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry. So the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell consists of two compartments. So we have, we have an anodic compartment and then we have a cathodic compartment. Okay. So, uh, so this is the basic structure of the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. So we have an anodic compartment, a cathodic compartment, and in between the anode and cathode, you have a solution of potassium hydroxide, right? This is the electrolyte. And this electrolyte consists of potassium hydroxide that has free ions, right? So what are the free ions in the solution? So we have potassium, obviously, and we also have our OH negative hydroxide ions, right? So we have the solution in between. And on the other side, we have this cathodic compartment. Now you may see that, this says negative anode, right? And right here it says positive cathode, right? But in the previous lecture, we studied that anode is actually the positive electrode, right? And cathode is actually the negative electrode. But you will see why it's called the anode, the negative electrode, why it's called the anode. And right here, why is this positive electrode called the cathode? So actually the roles are reversed. So as with the voltaic cell, the cathode is positive and the anode is negative. Okay, but the reactions occurring at each of the electrodes are the same, right? So you will see that at the anode you will have what? You will have oxidation at the anode, and at the cathode you will have reduction. Okay. So now that we know the basic structure of a voltaic cell, we need a fuel, right? So we need the fuel to be we need the fuel that has to be electrolyzed to generate energy. So in electrolysis, what we were doing is, so in electrolysis is basically composed of two words. So we have electro, that means electricity, right? So we have electrical energy. And then we have lysis, right? Lysis का मतलब जो होता है ना, lysis literally means breakdown. So in electrolysis, what you're doing is you're using electric energy, right? You're using electric energy to break down a compound, an ionic compound, right? But in an electrovoltaic cell or a voltaic cell, simply put, you are using you are using the energy. So in electrolysis, what you were doing is you were using electrical energy to break the bond, right? So you were using electrical energy to break the bond, right? But in a voltaic cell, you're using the energy of this bond, okay, to generate electricity. So it's basically the reverse of the electrolytic cell, but the working principle is the same, right? Okay, so both electrodes are made of porous tiny holes, okay, that contain a catalyst that speeds up the reaction. So yeah, so both the electrodes, let me just get rid of this. So both electrodes, the positive electrode and the negative electrode, are made up of a porous material. Okay, porous means that any material that has tiny holes in it. So that porous material contains a catalyst that is adsorbed onto that porous material, and uh, that speeds up the reaction. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So this is the anode compartment, and this is the cathode compartment, and we have an inlet, right? We have this inlet, and this is the outlet. We have another inlet, and you'll see what these are used for. So first of all, so if you look at the general structure of the fuel cell, so you see that it has an anodic compartment, a cathodic compartment, and you have two inlets, on the either side, and then you have one outlet on the cathodic compartment. So yeah, now keep this structure in mind, okay, and then you'll be able to understand how this works. So the first step is hydrogen gas will enter the anode chamber and it will get oxidized into hydrogen ions, losing electrons to the anode. So yeah. So what will happen here? Let me just use a different color. What will happen here is that H2 gas, okay, hydrogen gas, you'll feed hydrogen gas through this inlet. This was an inlet. Hydrogen gas will enter this inlet, and what will happen is at the anode, hydrogen gas, this reaction will occur. So at the anode, what will happen? Let me just use a different color for this. Okay. So at the anode, the negative anode, what will happen is H2 will lose electrons, say yeah, to form hydrogen ions and obviously losing two electrons, right? So we have H plus here, many H plus, and then we'll also have electrons, right? Okay, so what is the next step? So this is the reaction that is occurring. So hydrogen gas losing two electrons and forming hydrogen ions. The electrons that are formed, these ones, they pass along the wire to the cathode. So yes, यहाँ पे जो electrons which are released, they will pass along this wire. Okay, they'll pass along this wire, light up this bulb. Okay, and then they will move all the way to the cathodic compartment. Okay, so to the cathode. The hydrogen ions, on the other hand, okay, which are formed in the the anodic compartment, will move through the electrolyte to the cathode. Now remember that these hydrogen ions, okay, there are many hydrogen ions being formed. As you feed in the hydrogen gas, so the hydrogen gas is getting charged and then, forming hydrogen ions and electrons. Electrons are moving through the wire to the other side. Whereas this hydrogen ions, okay, these are moving through this electrode, okay, to the other side. And why are they moving to the other side? Because the concentration of hydrogen ions is being raised in the anodic compartment. And that's why they tend to diffuse to the other side, right? And they will diffuse through those small holes. Okay, so we talked about the small holes. Okay, we talked about that both of these electrodes are made of very tiny holes, right? So they will move to the opposite side and they will pass through the electrolyte. The electrolyte is a solution that contains ions and that can conduct electricity. So in this case, we use potassium hydroxide solution. So hydrogen ion will move through this electrolyte to the other side, right? And what will happen? So they will move through the electrolyte to the cathode. The hydrogen ions and the electrons then react with oxygen. So electrons are coming from the other side. Okay, इधर से electrons आए, यहाँ से hydrogen ion, right? And you are also feeding oxygen through this cell, okay, through the inlet of the cathodic compartment. So in the cathodic compartment, you're also feeding oxygen. So oxygen, the electrons and the hydrogen ions, right, they will react, right, in these molar ratios, and they will form water. Right? So at the cathodic side, you will be forming a lot of water. Okay, now you cannot just keep accumulating this water. You need to let it out. Okay, so the outlet is used to let the water out, right? So this oxidation of hydrogen gas at the anodic side, right? And that's why this is called the anode, because anode पे हमेशा जो reaction होते हैं वो क्या होता है, oxidation होती है. Remember anox. So that's why the negative electrode is called the anode. सही है? So the hydrogen gas is oxidized, and this creates a potential difference, right? So ions are formed on this side, right? Positive ions are formed on this side, okay? And this creates a potential difference on both sides, right? So this side is relatively abundant in electrons, right? So electrons will tend to move to the opposite side, and this will generate a current, right? So that's why it will light up the bulb, and that's how it generates electricity. Water leaves the fuel cell via the outlet. That's what we talked about. So the overall equation, when you balance them out, this is the equation for the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. You're basically forming water. So yeah, but you're also generating electricity in the process. So yeah. So yeah, this is just a summary. Hydrogen enters a hydrogen gas as fuel. will enter the cell, it will become oxidized and it loses electrons, right? To form hydrogen ions, and two electrons are also released, right? And this creates a potential difference, right? So this sets up a potential difference of voltage across the cell. And what is the potential difference? Is basically a difference in charge between the two electrodes, right? So because of the potential difference, the electrons tend to move from the anodic compartment to the cathodic compartment. So electrons move through the bulb, they light up the bulb, right? Because they're carrying energy. And then on the other side, what is happening is that this at the other side, the water is being formed, right? Because hydrogen ions, oxygen, and the electrons, they all react from water, which is being let out through the outlet, okay, on the cathodic side. So, and that's why the anode, because oxidation of hydrogen gas is occurring at this side. That's why this particular electrode is known as the anode, okay? And the other electrode will obviously be called the cathode because you have the reduction is occurring, right? Because you have a uh, gain of electron on this side, so yeah. So you have a reduction is occurring. Okay. So advantages and disadvantages of using hydrogen oxygen fuel cells, you just need to remember these. Let's just go over the advantages first. So hydrogen oxygen fuel cell just requires hydrogen and oxygen, which are abundantly available. So yeah, so literally there is uh, 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, and you can always extract hydrogen, right? Uh, can you guys hear me? Okay, so we were going over the advantages and disadvantages of hydrogen oxygen fuel cells, and we talked about the advantages. The hydrogen oxygen fuel cell just requires two components. So you require hydrogen and you require oxygen. So yeah, and oxygen is found in abundance in the Earth's atmosphere. So it's about 21%, makes up 21% of the atmospheric air. Hydrogen, on the other hand, is not as abundant, but can always be extracted from the air using specialized extraction machinery. Uh, it does not produce any waste, so it does not produce harmful greenhouse gases like CO2, or it does not produce harmful gases because of incomplete combustion like carbon monoxide and other gases like nitrogen monoxide and nitric oxide and sulfur dioxide, which usually come from the oxidation of fossil fuels like petrol. Uh, the working of a hydrogen oxygen fuel cell is simple. They last longer than batteries. They're obviously less polluting to dispose of because all they contain is the hydrogen and oxygen, and then water is being formed. So these are very pretty harmless substances. On the other hand, if you talk about the disadvantages, so hydrogen is a gas, right? So, it requires a very large space for storage. Okay, that's a major problem of using hydrogen gas. It requires a lot of space because gases expand, they occupy more volume. That's why hydrogen gas requires a lot of space for storage. So even if you start using them in cars, you'll run out of hydrogen very quickly because you know hydrogen जो होता है gas होती है, and it cannot be kept in the liquid form, although because it requires such low temperatures, okay, such sub-zero temperatures to be turned into a liquid. So the storage of hydrogen is a really big problem when it comes to hydrogen oxygen fuel cells. So it requires more space to store than fossil fuels or batteries. It is explosive, highly explosive when mixed with air. So if you fill a balloon with hydrogen gas, so yeah, and if you just light that balloon on fire, so it will likely burst. Okay, there will be an explosive and highly exothermic reaction. Okay, uh, the storage is dangerous for obvious reasons, and it requires energy to make hydrogen fuel. So yeah, so earlier we talked about uh, oxygen makes up a large proportion of the atmospheric air, but hydrogen is not as abundant as oxygen is, right? So, in the air, as a gas, as a separate gas, hydrogen is not abundant. Although hydrogen makes, most of our organic compounds, organic matter on Earth, but it's not really abundant as a gas. So you need to extract it from the air. And when you extract it from the air, that machinery requires energy. Okay? So when you're powering that machinery using fossil fuels, okay, so it's basically the same thing. Okay, you're using fossil fuels to produce an eco-friendly fuel. So you know the benefits, sorry, the disadvantages kind of outweigh the benefits here. So that's why the practical aspect, the practicality of hydrogen oxygen fuel cells has not been explored yet. They're not very practical to use. So yeah, that was all for hydrogen oxygen fuel cells. I hope you understood everything. And if you have any questions, you may ask.